But yes, now it's my pleasure to introduce you introduce the last speaker of today to you, Jonas Otterbeck from Lund University in Sweden, and one of the kind of leading figures in the field of music and Islam studies, if there exists such a field. But nevertheless, he's written extensively on this topic, and you can find his writings also in this. There was this book released a couple of years ago, or 10 years ago, I guess now. Shoot the Singer, and released by the FreeMuse organization, which is the anti-censorship association. But there he has a good article on the kind of general problematics of music and Islam from the kind of censorship point of view. And it's also been translated into Finnish if you want to read that stuff in Finnish. And I think that it exists, the book, in many languages nowadays. But anyway, thank you. Welcome, Jonas.
I've never seen the Finnish book.
Oh, okay.
So I've never seen the Finnish version of the article.
Yeah.
I would really love to see that. Anyway, thank you very much for inviting me. And I'm going to speak on this topic, the awakening of Islamic pop. So in a way, it actually just continues from this morning's speech. So I want you to keep that in the back of your mind, because it's really relevant for what I'm going to see. I'm going to go into basically the third category that you were talking about, the new produced global Islamic pop music by a specific company called Awakening. But first, since I'm not a musicologist but come from religious studies, I would like to just draw your attention to what kind of religious studies we do in Lund University, where the key question that we operate with could be formulated like this: what does this or that person do with Islamic discursive tradition in a certain context? That is, we look at agency, we look at processes, we look at power, and how religion is not necessarily manipulated, because that's a negative word, but used and understood by people in different power positions. So I'm as interested in the religion of children as I am in the religion of Al-Farabi, one of the sort of big geniuses that was mentioned earlier. I don't take any specific interest in only the intellectual tradition. I'm interested in what people do with this, which would also include what non-Muslims would do with Islam. So I've, for example, did studies on Islamophobia and the representation of Islam, because it's a way of using Islamic discursive tradition. So that's the starting point for what I'm doing. So do not expect a theological exposé. This specific research that I'm doing right now, so this is ongoing research, it's not finished in any way, it's steered by a question that we could formulate like this: what dynamics are created between a capitalist consumer society-driven music production and Islamic theology, as the former is marketed as faith-based in Islam? So we have a product that is marketed in all the traditional ways of marketing, but it is faith-based, so it always mirrors itself in Islamic studies, in theology. What does that mean? How do you do that? And how does Islamic theology change and put sort of fences around what you can do? And how do you change Islamic theology? This is what I'm looking at. This is a little about the design of the study. You can read for yourself. Basically, then, it's a company called Awakening, and I will present more about that. And it's a fieldwork study, which basically means that I'm trying to interview a lot of people, take part in concerts, in studio rehearsals, in recordings, talk with producers, musicians, artists, people who's in charge of the company, etc., etc. Theory-wise, it relates to several different areas, and I'll go into some of these later. But sociology, anthropology, culture studies, but also ethnomusicology and performance studies, not least. But first, let's present Awakening for you. Awakening is founded in 2000 in London by 4 young men who had recently turned 20. For example, Sharif Hassan Abani was 22. And the first thing that they did was that they produced a book about Muhammad called the Seerah of the Final Prophet. And the Seerah is, of course, the biography of a prophet, and it's a living genre. It's sort of not a fixed genre where you have one historical book, then everyone repeats that. You can sort of make new seerahs. And this Sharif Hassan Abani was encouraged by his father to make a biography for British youth, basically. Preferably Muslim, but also others, to read about who Muhammad was. And he wrote it when he was 16 years old, but no one wanted to produce it and publish it. So eventually, 6 years later, he and a friend said, now it's time, let's do something different. Let's produce a high-quality book out of this. Because they were irritated as activists in sort of a Muslim Brotherhood network of the low quality, the poor quality of paper, of book production, of recordings, what have you. They didn't like that. So they wanted to sort of raise the bar. So they did this on good quality paper, good setting, nice cover, and it actually sold quite well, fairly fast. 35,000 copies, actually, they managed to sell off. So they dared to develop the company, and they went into audio lectures on Islam. They also went into American Islamic stand-up comedy. In 2002, they produced a record by a guy who later would go into a stand-up comedy under the name of Allah Made Me Funny, and actually made quite a great success. You can check that out on YouTube if you want to. Allah Made Me Funny, there's a lot of clips on that. In 2003, they decide to try out to make a record. And they then made it with Sami Yusuf, who's a childhood friend of one of the founders, Bara Khariji. And Bara Khariji is from the Khariji family in Tunis. And those of you who know a little about that would know that this is Islamist nobility, let's call it that. His father is Rashid al-Ghanouchi, so the leader of the Nahda party, well, not anymore, but during the last decades. So we are talking about people who are well connected in Islamist circles. Bara and Sharif, they were youth leaders. They sort of had groups where they met with young people and said, okay, what can you do for Islam? And it's rumored by Bara, and I have seen it confirmed by Sami in interviews, that they had this meeting, and Sami said, well, I'm a musician, I can't do anything for Islam. What would I be able to do? Bara had grown up on the new nasheed genre, the new radical nasheed genre, which basically means the resistant music of Hezbollah and Hamas. This was sort of the songs of his youth, of his teens. So he said, well, there is the possibility of recording in other ways and sort of record with a positive tone about God. And also the idea of purposeful art was now being developed fully in the Arab world, in the Wasatiyya movement in Egypt, for example, with Fan al-Hadith, purposeful art. Also in Shia circles, they had this idea of purposeful art. So the issue was there. And they said, well, why not? So what they did was that they recorded an album called Al-Muallim, the teacher, which is, of course, a metaphor for Muhammad. And it sold reasonable, got some attention, not least because they were smart. They managed to put Sami during the summer. The album was recorded during the summer and then released during the autumn. But during the summer, Rayhan was visiting London and, well, UK, basically. And Rayhan had risen from 96 when they recorded their first album and were now huge stars in Malaysia, in Southeast Asia, but also in other circles. It was basically the first Islamic boy band. handsome young men doing all the moves apart from the sexual ones and singing about the love of God, outselling anything basically in Malaysia. Also secular acts, if we may do that separation. So some Yusuf opened for them and created sort of expectations. It sold fairly well, but what they really did that was extremely smart was that in 2005 they decided to take all the money that the company had made and put it in one production, hiring Hani Usama, an Egyptian director with some reputation, to make a video for the title song. And it's rumored also that Sharif, for example, he sold, well, it's not rumored, he told me in an interview that he actually sold his car to be able to afford this. They put all the money in, and they decided to put it on Melody Hits. So they pushed this secular MTV-ish company that normally only broadcasted American rock and highly sexualized Arab video clips. So, why put a religious singer there? Normally, you had, this was the area, the time period when the satellite TV had started to blossom, and you had the religious channels, and they would, without question, send this material. But they took the decision to send it in another channel. And it really made a success. The video is this one. For some reason here. There. Look at the material standard.
We once had a teacher of teachers. He changed the world for the better and made us better creatures. Oh Allah, we shamed ourselves, we strayed from Al-Mu'allim. Surely we wronged ourselves, what will we say in front of it? Mu'allim, he was Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Muhammad, mercy upon mankind, teacher of mankind, Abul Qasim, ya Habibi ya Muhammad, ya Shafi.
Here comes the change languages that just like you said.
يا مصطفى يا إمام المرسلين يا مصطفى يا شفيع العالمين يا مصطفى يا إمام.
So of course they all around do that.
He prayed while others slept, while others ate. He fasted while they would laugh. He wept until he breathed his.
Okay, it was a huge success, this one. I mean, it really made sales skyrocket. From the moment when they sent that on Melody Hits, he became a superstar. And not only sort of an Egyptian one, because the Egyptian channel was an all-Arab, pan-Arab satellite channel, so he really made it big. And during the coming years, he established himself as the #1 star in this genre of neo-nasheed. But what it did was that it allowed Awakening to contract new artists. And they signed Maher Zain, Irfan Maki. Maher just happened to be Lebanese-Swedish, and Irfan Maki is Canadian-Pakistani. They are all, in a way, similar. They're handsome young men, and it always looks like it's autumn in their dress code. It's like hats and shawls and sort of autumnish colours. And it's always in the videos healthy, wealthy, upper class, upper middle class environments, sending the signal that we are established. Do you remember the trick that they did when they established Motown? The one who trained the Motown artists, who were sort of rough-edge Chicago kids, they said, you should act like nobility. No, royalty. You should act like royalty. So they learned them how to dress. They taught them the manners, and then they came on stage and took it like royalty. This is basically what they're doing with these guys. In a way, they're contrasting a media image consumed by non-Muslims and Muslims alike of the screaming fundamentalist male. They're offering a new kind of masculinity, and I'll go into that. 2008 saw the leaving of Sami Yusuf and the rise after a while of Maher Zain, which is presently their largest star and the biggest star, who's now recently this year issued his third album and still selling well. Awakening Now then, it's a leading Muslim media company. You can see some of their production here, which is pretty impressive. More than 5 million albums, 800 million views on YouTube, for example. For 13 years, they have arranged 750 gigs. They are particularly large in social media. Maher's Facebook's page has 26 million likes. If you compare his more successful songs like Ya Nabi Salam Alayka has been viewed in the official channel 85 million times, to compare it with, for example, YouTube's Beautiful Day, YouTube's Beautiful Day, 77 million, and Roxette, Swedish, 160 million. But we can't compare with Shakira or Justin Bieber, who is over 1 billion hits on his Baby. Gangnam Style with 2 billion hits. Have you seen that 2 billion times? Or who is the guy or girl who's seen that 2 billion times? It's sort of almost as distressing as the Trump victory. If they self-describe themselves, this is what they say. We are doing faith-based and value-driven music. They say Awakening's intention was never to reform Islam, but to contemporize it, to make it sort of modern, in line with new times. And importantly, they say, having a strong footing in the world of Islamic scholarship helped immensely. So they are footing in the world of Islamic scholarship to create this faith-based music without changing, just contemporizing. And what would that really mean? And what does it mean that they have a footing? Well, if we look at the 4 guys who are running the show, 2 of them have degrees from Al-Azhar. One of them has a bachelor in Sharia, and one of them has that bachelor and a master's and is pursuing a PhD. And his topic, surprise, surprise, is Islamic theology and arts. So he's an entrepreneur in a field that is also creating theology in. So they are in contact with his teachers, Bara's teachers, and they are in contact with Tariq Ramadan, which some of you might know of, and his Sila project, which is a Qatar-sponsored project, probably one of the most well-financed Islamic projects ever. I mean, I'm talking from 600s until now. It has like 14 different working groups with 10 people working in each, and it's such a huge expense around this group. And one of the sections is art, headed by Sharif, who's he's the CEO, and of course chaired by Tariq Ramadan. And for example, a scholar like Al-Judai, who's a Maliki scholar who sits in Leeds right now, but actually Iraqi origin, taught a lot in Jordan and Kuwait. And 2007 he wrote like a 400-page book on music, theological opinions on music. So, and it's pretty sort of allowing It's a liberal book. So these people are not only doing a production, a commercial production, they are participating in the making of theology, which makes them particularly interesting for someone doing Islamic studies. They are unashamedly capitalist. They'll work with anyone, as you can see in this list. They have no female artists. We were touching on that earlier this morning. They simply don't know how to market them. They want female artists, but since they are in dialogue and they don't want to reform Islam but to contemporize it, they want female artists, but they don't know how to do it yet. And even male artists, in a way, is a problem, as we should see. They are already going into film, so that's not the future. We'll see one more clip, and then we'll try to discuss a little about the two clips. This one is from Maher Zain, who is live in Jakarta at a political gathering for an Islamist party, but it's in a huge scale.
Every time you feel like you cannot go on, you feel so lost and that you're so alone. All you see is night and darkness all around. You feel so helpless, you can't see which way to go. Don't despair and never lose hope, 'cause the Lord is always by your side.
This is a concept that any concept can see anywhere. You have the fashionist movie, and you have the flirty artists.
You'll find a way. You commit one more mistake. You feel so helpless, see which way to go. So
You see that it's not down to moving in time.
you have made on your mind, and your heart is full of shame. But don't despair and never lose hope, 'cause the Lord is always by your side. Oh, inshallah, inshallah, you'll find your way. Inshallah, 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 you'll find your way.
You may also notice the full instrumentation.
Inshallah, 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 we'll find our way. Inshallah, 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 we'll find our way. Let's do the break time, come on. Inshallah, 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 we'll find our way. Inshallah, 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 we'll find our way.
Suddenly there is full instrumentation. Something has happened. Now, if we take a step back and return to what we have seen and what I'm doing. So we have the theoretical aspect that I'm working with, and I think I need all of this, even though it makes it a bit complicated. There is an interesting discussion stemming from Michel Foucault on ethical selves. How do you construct yourself as an ethical being? I'll return to that. There is an Assadian approach to Islamic discursive tradition, which I've touched upon on the question, that basically means that you allow a lot of plurality when you study Islam. It's not sort of, I'm looking for the true Islam. Any expression made seriously by a Muslim will be taken as Islam, even if it has no scriptorial basing or anything like that. So it's an anthropological understanding. A sociological culture studies approach to consumer society, not just simply saying that there is a consumer society, but looking at the mechanism. What does a consumer society do? For example, when you have an arena like that, with the lights, with a band, how will an audience react to that? Do you know how to be an audience? That is part of, you learn yourself to be an audience. You are taught to be a performer. What are the rules and regulations? Sociological, anthropological approach to gender and the body, and I'll return to especially the body, but also to masculinity. And an ethnomusicology understanding of performance, which I think you may find it in anthropology, but no one is as skilled as ethnomusicologists and musicologists to discuss what's happening on a stage, which is a really interesting eye-opener for me, who has not... I'm not trained as an ethnomusicologist or musicologist, but rather I read a lot of anthropology, and then you encounter this on the performing body, which is very interesting reading. If we look at the ethical self discussion, it stems from the anthropology of Islam, the way that it's treated in this particular environment. And it comes from that Sama Mahmoud, who was a PhD researcher under Talal Assad, who I mentioned. She wanted to critique Bourdieu for his ideas of habitus, which basically means that you behave in a certain manner without really thinking about it. Sort of you get waste. And we always do that. I mean, I do this with my hand. You don't react to it. But if I would do this, you would probably react to it. So that's a really odd way of doing a lecture. But if I do like this, you simply accept it. So it's within our habitus that a teacher is making gestures like this. So she was saying that when you cultivate piety, it's not a case of habitus, because you're training yourself. You're training yourself to pray. You're training yourself to naturalize the wearing of the hijab. You're training yourself to fast. And you're disciplining yourself with a triangulation. By praying, you might avoid music better, or avoid haram things. By praying, you might remind yourself that you shouldn't look at girls or boys, and you should suppress those. So you're consciously training to get a habitus. This was her point. So you're training to have an ethical self. Now, Samulishilke, which is, by the way, misspelled there, should be an I after the E. He criticized her because he said that, well, she doesn't really allow for ambivalence, and this comes from a methodology, because you interview people and ask them, how do you do? What do you do? Instead of following them around and doing the tedious work of field work. If she would do that, she would probably find that they say one thing, but act in another way. Now, he then talks about moral registers and say that if you have different moral registers, you might find yourself that you have a religious register, a sexual register, an economic register, and register about respectability and respect around you, and you might have a special moral register for family things, which might take away all the other ones, because family matters. So if you take that into account, you cannot expect people to be fully coherent. Okay, if we have those things, a pursuing of the ethical self, a risk of not being coherent. If we then look at the staged persona, we end up in a very special position. Because if you invest in an ethical staged persona, you better be consistent and not find out. You cannot say, I love my mother, I sing to my wife, I adore God, and then do cocaine on the backstage and be caught doing it. You cannot keep your respectability that way. Or for that matter, chat up the cute Pakistani girls on a London concert. You can't do that. you have to keep straight. And this is something that they work a lot with, consciously, in the awakening environment. So if you just look at a couple of questions that I interrogate this. So how are they doing this? How are they presented, marketed? How do they control this representation? How do they discuss, make attempts, fail, succeed, and how that develop, how they present their stars? And what is the position of the ones around them, musicians, production team? How do they relate to this? Some of them are not Muslim. What happens in the actual meeting? What goes on backstage? These kind of things. I'm really curious, because the other things I can find out by putting on a couple of YouTube videos, because they are there. So I've done some field work. As of now, I've seen a couple of concerts, and I've also hanged out with them for a 10-day period in a London tour, well, not London, Midland tour in England then. And study these things, but also done my homework, listening to the songs, etc., and looking at the videos. So, in a way, we can then have some themes for this ethical masculinity. Dress is important. There is no way that they're going to unbutton their shirt and show their chest and do like this. There's no way. No flaunting of muscles or anything like that. No sexual dance step, not even sort of simple Arabic dance steps. They will go around like a conferencier, singing and moving their feet out of beat. Have you ever tried that? To move out of the rhythm of the song while singing. Especially in the beginning, when they had sing-back. So they had their music, and then they sang. And it was pretty boring shows, in a way. It was in front of an audience at an Islamic gathering, and this was what was allowed. But in 2005, Sami Yusuf recorded, I will return to that by the way, recorded one of his albums in two versions, one fully instrumented and one voice only, the drums and voice. And then he insisted on playing live with the band. And most people turned him down, but he was so popular, so eventually they accepted him. And now, this is what you get. You see the full band in 2014, and it'll be everywhere. And this is very often the highlight of Islamic gatherings, to bring one of these artists, local artists, global stars. And it'll pull the youth, because they'll come. And the parents will say to the youth, well, go. It's okay, you can go to this concert. I don't want you to go to Justin Bieber, but this is good. You can consume this. This is like a consumption thing also. This is halal consumption. So, the dress and the movements are restrained, and I've looked at hours of film. I've especially looked at Maher, and one time I see that he actually taps his foot in time in a specific place where he probably lost track, where I need to come in the right place with the singing. So we do 3-4 with his foot, and then it's added. One time I saw him do like this, marking two symbols. The drums go, and then body posture like this again. But of late, he's been changing the jacket to a fairly tight slipper, and he's starting to develop some Elvis moves, like this, with his shoulders, and like that, introducing some movement. So, in a way, he has become professional in a restricted movement way. Learning how to use the stage, coming close to the people, leaning over, throwing the microphone, introducing some movement through that way, instead of going on and dancing or anything like that. Which is really interesting. He's sort of inventing a new way, starting with sort of the boring conference style, and now going into a full entertainment style. All the contracted men, apart from one who's a boy, is handsome men, but he'll probably grow up to a handsome young man eventually. And there is definitely the question of a female gaze that we can talk about. There's a lot of theory about male gaze, of course, on female bodies and female entertainers. But this is definitely a case of female gaze. And it's interesting because you have when I toured with them, and you can see that also in the clip from Maher, they'll all be dancing, there will be people doing like this. Sort of, I remember one girl in Brighton, in Bristol, on this tour that I was with them. Most of the concerts were family concerts, but this specific one had many students, so the families were not really present, so people were a little freer in the movement as an audience. And there was this girl with two friends, and I was just standing behind them, and when Maher came, they rose from their seats and looked at Maher, and then she did like this, and fell back in her chair, and her friends were just like, come on. And she was sort of faking the fangirl faint of her artist. And at that particularly that concert, I heard at least 3 or 4 girls just screaming out, I love you, Maher! And he's sort of trying to control, goes in and says, let's enjoy ourselves, in a halal way, of course, in a decent way. No screaming girls. And with a big teddy bearish smile, it's basically saying the contrary. So there is some flirtation going on, using the female gaze of the audience. Still, it's always the good son. It's charity. I mean, if we take once again Maher, he's a UNESCO ambassador for Palestinian refugees, for example. He's the all-around good egg. He is, in Swedish television, he pops up in a charity for children, typically. And many of the concerts that they made, like half of them are charity concerts. I'm trying to keep track of the clock, but I still have like a couple of minutes. So I was in more than a week, and have you been on a tour bus ever? Or been on a bus with like 10 guys in their 20s and no women around? This was such a bus, and I didn't hear once a sexist comment. No one swore. There was one, do you know the game Mafia? It's like passing your time. You have a system that someone is a game leader and they appoint someone who kills other people, and the police who investigates, etc. And the idea is that you're going to find out who is the Mafia. And you close your eyes so you can't see what's happening, and then you might be killed in that. Well, it's a game of deceit, basically. One guy, the drummer, by the way, in the last live clip, he stood up, and it can be quite heated because you're lying to each other, basically. So he stood up and said, well, lie, it's not me, I'm not Mafia. And there were 2 guys who separately just rose up and said, you don't say well lie, that means by God, because we're lying. Anyone who says that, we can't play with you. And he said, I'm sorry, I was just excited. Yeah, we know, but don't. On a tour bus. It's not like hardcore metalheads. So it was interesting. And also, since I was there, of course I brought in a lot of discussion, and while I was discussing with Wasim, one of the owners, about a thing, I said, what about the dance? I mean, there is no dancing. And they said, no, of course not, because I mean, can't have the artist dancing. And then I heard the bass player say, aren't we allowed to move? And he and his brother, who's the keyboard player, are Pentecostal Dutch, deeply devout Christians who are playing in this deeply devout Muslim show. Because they're good musicians, they're actually excellent musicians. But being a bass player, you have to move a bit to keep time. I mean, it's difficult to play the bass. So you can't stand, either you stand completely still or you have to move a bit. And I can hear him saying that, aren't we allowed to move? And that puts Wasim in a strange situation. He said, of course you're allowed to move, and he didn't want to say, but you're not allowed to dance sexually to this man who's like almost 2 meters high with a huge belly and a bass like this, because you're not supposed to be sexual. So it really didn't come to that, but the tension was there. And it was interesting when we were discussing these things, how difficult it was to frame it, because they felt that it was too restricted, still it was part of the self-evident way of presenting yourself ethically. We can't have that sort of movement. It was also interesting when it came to Harris J. And he was only like 14 years old at this time, so I shouldn't even say this in front of the cameras, because this empirical stuff I shouldn't really use. But so I won't go into detail, because he's too young to feature in a scientist scholarly investigation. But there were discussions about his dressing and jewelry, etc., that also brought these things up. And I already mentioned that, the last part of how you train yourself to be an audience, which is really interesting in itself. Looking at time, I'll actually just shoot through this, as I mentioned it before. They record voice only, and I asked that in a question earlier, but in the beginning of the 1990s, mid-1990s, you had the pioneers and they all choose voice only, and that's why I was curious about the Turkish development, if that was different. And from 2005, almost all of them have gone into part instrumentation or full instrumentation, apart from the South African Biha, who has gone into huge productions, but still using only percussion and choirs. But they have taken advantage of really advanced production, and I'm working together with Johannes Fransen Schilpo, that you know. Annemette's PhD researcher is finished now, on looking at the production, and he's really skilled on these things. And he says that the way that they use the digital technology is actually quite novel at times, creating these voice-only landscapes to be large and big enough to pass as instruments, almost. The interesting thing for me is the way that Awakening had taken part of it. I've already mentioned the split record, and they have made more voice-only and percussion versions of songs and records. And they push the live performance, as I said. What they basically do then is that they argue for two legal positions at the same time. They argue in their production that it's legal to produce with full instrumentation, even though Islamic scholars might have objections to flutes, to stringed instruments, etc. And they also argue in a way that you should be able to do restricted production with voice only and percussion, catering for, as they think, to audience. Maybe it's the same audience, maybe they buy both records or listen to both versions on Spotify. But they are specifically thinking that they are catering for a golf audience who do not want the instruments, but they want the songs. So they make songs and productions that sound as if they had instruments. They make a bass sound like boom, and then they put that in a computer and they make a bass that's on boom, boom, boom. And it sounds like a bass, but it is a human voice. And then there are fatwas saying that, well, this kind of production that fakes instruments, do not use the instruments. Therefore, it's halal. It's okay. So, in a way, you can accuse them of this double legal position, saying this is like cynicism. You don't have your real position is the instrument position. Or you could say that, well, you are respectful for two audience, and we like that. And it seems like they've pulled that one off. They simply made that their ethical position to cater for two markets respectfully for both. Since everyone who knows a little about this knows that there are different positions about music. So once again, they are dealing with this. This is the last slide, but one. The last one is sort of just, I'm talking to you, so you don't stop me. So they're dealing with this ethical concerns in a very novel and creative way. The male performer, his ethical self, is always put in relation to Islamic discourses. But you can see that it's in progress. You can see that they move forward all the time, change their way of understanding this. But they also push. They push theologians to produce. So in 2007, Al-Judai wrote his book on music allowing for instrument. In 2005, they went on sort of the trend of using more instruments, even though the argument was not in print. They were in dialogue with Al-Judai, because Al-Judai is one of Sharif's teachers. So they know each other. It's like, and they are really well connected through their, both Sharif's and Bara's fathers know all these people. You have the consumer society, which invites certain tastes, certain lifestyles. You want to be able to consume pop music, but if you want it halal, you have to negotiate it with Islamic theology all the time. But Islamic theology was when mass culture came, it was associated with Europeanization, the elites of the society, the secular elites. So basically the Islamic movement said, no-go area. We don't do theatre, we don't do film, we don't do pop. But 80s, 90s, there came a new discourse and slowly it changed. And now every single Islamic movement on earth, I would say, even the Islamic State, uses pop music to promote their thing. Importance of cultural creativity in relation to Islamic rules and ethics. This is basically the genre of research that I'm into right now. I think, and connecting to what Antti said in the morning, yes, it is important to study radicalism, or whatever we should call it, Salafi narratives or jihadi narratives, because they are important politically. So of course we should study them, why shouldn't we? But if we only study that, we together produce a lie of that this is the only thing that matters. So one way of doing it is to listen, study culture creativity when artists are putting themselves in relation to their religious identity and putting that into their songs, paintings, video games, films. So I find that genre a really promising genre of sort of expanding on it. And we have a postdoc project starting in half a year that will sort of emerge in that specific area, and hopefully we'll have a possibility to go even further in it. And you can find an interesting, fairly new reader on this called Islam and Popular Culture, which is out like January or something like that, 2016. A great article on Shia discussion, comparable with what I say right now. So there's a Shia article also, but also on Iranian theatre, dance, well, basically a lot of extremely interesting case studies. Some spin-offs of the projects this far. Many of them early products, but pointing towards what I've just told you, but most of this is actually in the making. And the only article really that is out as of now on this project is in Finnish, and I can't even read it myself, but many of you can read it. It's like the third line there. But it's written in English, so I've read the manuscript at least, but it might say very strange things in Finnish that I can't take responsibility for. Anyway, I'll stop there and invite questions.
Okay, good, thank you. All right, yes, we have plenty of time for discussion and comments. All right, we want to start. An exhaustive presentation, I think. Or
it's getting late.
No, not exhaustive. Well, exhaustive in the positive sense that. What is the word? The word. Can't remember. Yeah. It was an interesting thing. This or the whole idea of so that I'm sure how to draw parallels here maybe between the kind of communism that prevails in China, in a sense, that how to I'm not sure if there is a kind of parallel here, or there are there any really, but still that the idea of that, is this a signal in a sense of the kind of a prevalence of the market values and the consumerist culture in general, or how do you see the kind of future in here, that is this also a kind of, well, to me, in a sense, the cynical mind I have kind of leans towards the question that is this just going to go towards the kind of a consumerization of the kind of Islamic values in the end, so that we are inevitably going towards the westernization, or westernization in the sense that it's the consumer capitalism that prevails there, or is there kind of a really a theological kind of a development taking place, and in that sense I was maybe inclined to or think about this in terms of the generational changes, that these people seem to be a kind of a vanguard position there, that they have the kind of a, well, as you say, that they are well networked, they have connections, they have resources, or at least when they sell their cars they have the resources, but still that they are in a because of their background, at least partially, they are in a position, they're well educated, that they can, in a sense, make the change or make some changes. But does that, in your kind of experience and in terms of your expertise, do you see that there is a kind of a, in a sense, maybe a new way for a kind of more theological reorientation here as well?
I think that if we remember what was said this morning, this full partition, I think that this kind of that aspire to be global, and to some certain degree actually is global also. You can find fans of these people all over the world. They affect the local level, definitely. The way that they want to present themselves, and they will, as you know, if there will be sort of a fashion of putting a young handsome man on stage, there will be a young handsome man who's a little cheekier the next time. And then there will be someone pulling it, and then the phenomenon will be split. So I think, as it is right now, this phenomenon will split. This will not last, as all pop culture phenomenons will not last. My prediction would be that some of the artists will leave and do something else. Sami Yusuf did. He left and said that I want to go into Sufi music. So he sort of went into his, he has, as you mentioned, he has Azeri origin, but he's born in Tehran, so he's Iranian Azeri. So he has invented his Iranian roots by recording Sayyid Hussein Nasr's Sufi poetry, put them into music, and is touring now with a traditional band. So the artist will develop, but the situation is part of a larger consumerist Islam that has been studied quite a lot, especially fine case studies from Malaysia, which is one of the areas where this has gone the furthest. But also you can find even a more general aspect, like there is a new Routledge Handbook of Religion and Popular Culture, like 500 pages, really dense research on video games, dolls, board games, cooking, adventure lands, dress codes, music, radio, television. And if we go even one, and it's of course not Islam, it's any religion. Indian comic books is a great thing, for example. And if you go one step up, you can see even a larger trend that it has always been like this. When the mosque came and the money was put into the big Friday mosque, that affected European architecture. Italian churches was being sort of rethought because of the grand scale of the mosque and the what do you call it, the cupola, these kind of things. There are even Italian churches with a bell tower who looks exactly like a minaret, because style affects, and it has always done that. And so I think that this kind of we shouldn't make it exotic. It is radical now. It's happening a lot of things right now, but it has happened in different ways before. in architecture, for example, in intellectual streams and ideas, the exchange in your field in India, for example, between meditation techniques and understandings of the mystical between Buddhism and Sufism. I mean, it's well known, the Greek astronomy and how it flowed over the Arabic Persian world and met the understanding of the Indian equivalents and how that merged. So these kind of things happen all the time. So I think this is in a way just a natural development. People like music, condition one. People like pop music. People like good pop music. Parents hate trashy pop music, and they want to invent nice pop music. Okay, so there's a market for nice pop music and nice guys presenting these, and possibly eventually nice girls. Because the parents like it, and if you refuse your kid to be able to go to a concert, but to say that you can go to that concert but not that concert, they will rebel against you or be nice and go to that concert and get the concert feeling and be able to use the female gaze in this case, scream a bit, dance a bit, or possibly sit down and chair dance a bit. Is there a word for chair dancing? I'm looking for that. And consume a male body, a male face through the songs and the emotions, and you can go back to your room and listen to your iPod and do your homework as a good Catholic or good Muslim girl in this case, and still have this sort of fangirl consumption. But eventually they grow old. I mean, this semester, I talked a little with my new students about Islamic pop music, and I mentioned Mahazain, and there was this Somali girl with some dreadlocks and an Iron Maiden t-shirt saying, yeah, my mother likes him. I was like, oh no, that hurt. So eventually they'll be irrelevant in a way. But still, I mean, Elvis fans, they grew with Elvis, one thing that we discussed over lunch, which I think is interesting, is also the possibility of crossovers. That, for example, if you open this up, like Johannes Franzen Schelbo, in his dissertation, no, he's not in his dissertation, but he wrote about music listening among Muslim youth, young adults in Copenhagen. And he had this interview with a Shia girl, who's an activist Shia girl with Iraqi origin. And she said that, he made a deal with them that he could follow their flow when they're listening to Spotify. So he could see in real time what they were listening to. And she was continuously listening to Johnny Cash. And then he asked her, why do you always return to Johnny Cash? Well, he's a great artist. Yeah, but is there anything more? He said, yeah, honestly, I think he's Shia. And Johannes was like this, what do you mean Johnny Cash is Shia? Of course you don't know that he's not Shia. Yeah, but he's all dressed in black. Check. He has this songs about suffering. He's deeply religious. He sings about the injustice of the world, and he takes the part of the one who is wronged. Can you be more Shia than that? So she found a Shia ethics in Johnny Cash's lyrics, and I bet that there's a lot of people crossing over boundaries like this, tapping into not only the spirituality of other artists, being sort of deeply devout Christian and listening to a Muslim artist, or the other way around, but also this kind of crossovers, that you find something that we not necessarily think of because we draw the boundaries wrong.
Yeah. Another thing that I was thinking about there also related to this idea, I think I've heard you talk before also about the kind of new Muslim masculinity and this idea, but here I was wondering in terms of the female gaze and in relation to the kind of a heteronormativity that's built into that, so that we assume in a sense that okay, if the object of the gaze is a male figure, then there must be a female gaze. But is there any room for kind of a more sexually diverse idea of the gaze in this case, and maybe through that are there any instances of homophobia or anything like linked to homosexuality here that kind of might come into the play, and how they are dealt with?
I can't really answer because it would demand that I had a very diverse audience, or possibility to discuss very well with audiences. The men that I've been in the audience have, at these charity concerts, have generally been pretty reserved in their body language. It's been like this.
Yeah, like the guys who was sitting there with the white shirts. Yeah.
So it's difficult to observe any eroticism. That would require interviews, basically. But there is the old idea in Islamic theology and possibly in many popular contexts outside the Muslim world also, that you deeply sexualized female artists, the body and the voice, etc., but you emasculate male artists, or you make them overtly sexual, overtly heterosexual, or emasculated in some ways. So these kind of issues discussed because sensitivity and for example, if you work a lot with a voice in high register, would make some people draw those kind of parallels. But once again, I haven't come across sort of an internet page saying that these guys are just gay, or a very sort of homo hostile page or anything like that. Nothing of the sort.
No, any
as of
memes?
this. No.
Okay.
No, the only thing is the obvious, where you have, for example, Maher's love song to his wife, which is followed by a really nice video made by Lina Khan, who's an American convert who is a really creative filmmaker, one that really merits some studies. She's intelligent and she's really smart with what she's doing with film right now. But she made one of the videos, and I looked at the comments on YouTube, and some of them were really oozing. It was just like, ooh, I wish I had a man like you, or your wife must be very happy, things like that. Not overly sexually explicit, but quite clear anyway.
Okay. We are content with. Okay, Elin.
Throw in a stupid comment, but the first videos for some reason made me think about George Michael. So I wonder if there might be that sort of connection, that people go to see this, but at the same time they might be actually thinking about something else. I mean, thinking about the history with George Michael and all the sexual things, and although there was no dancing, but I don't know if it was his voice or there was something that reminded me of George Michael for some reason.
Maybe the beard.
I don't know.
It's not that.
George Michael.
No, but it's a kind of.
Voice or some sort of
but it's a kind of a performing body, and performing in a certain tonal palette, fairly modulated, fairly soft, and with a sort of cut beard and well, a youth's sort of nice charm. But of course, he was more overtly sexual. Yes, so this is the halal version of George Michael in a way. And Irfan Maki was actually marketed as the Michael Jackson of Islamic pop. He had a very high-pitched voice. So that they are drawing the parallels and using the skills of their imagined audience. They imagine that the audience know these. They don't think that people sort of listened to the Quran recitation and then they went into this. They know that they listen to the pop music and they then come up with the alternative and making the references. And also at times playing, like Maher is playing What a Wonderful World as a cover, making it in a way Islamic lyrics.
I'm just thinking about what are the kind of what is the word? The kind of ways of evoking these images in people's heads of that. I mean, although they don't dance, but there are kind of these parallels to other public characters like George Michael or Michael Jackson or whoever. that kind of there's these techniques of evoking those things that are not shown, that they are actually shown inside people's heads, in the audience imagination.
And this is what I get, especially anthropologists. They tend to want me to go into a study of the reception, and I would love to do that, but after mapping down the production. And I think that's really a perfect PhD project right now, to do a reception study of this. What does it mean to consume this? That would be really interesting. And I would love to read it. No, but seriously, I think it's a really good project. What does it mean to consume this?
It's also part of the production of how to find these very subtle ways of evoking images.
Yeah, and especially if you then, if you look at it in a social semiotic multimodal way, how does sound work, image, how does it work together for your experience as growing up? And I mean, this is part of Muslim pride, of course, especially in the European context, but also in other contexts. These people are sort of decent people that can be proud of in a way that is maybe more difficult if you're a peace-loving, young, intellectual, middle-class Muslim, to be proud of some of the people that generally figure in mass media representing Islam. There was a great, really great short study about Jewish leaders in the early 20th century and how important it was for the Jewish American congregation that they were handsome and that they spoke well and had beautiful voices. And they pulled crowds by coming up and looking the part of the sort of strong Jewish, handsome young man, because Jews were in the stereotype emasculated, ugly, they weren't, well, they were sneaky but not smart, etc. So the intellectual leaders contrasted this. It's a really interesting way. And also if you look at Evangelina Booth, for example, of Sisters of Mercy, the daughter of the founder, who were truly important for the mission in the early 20th century, where they tried a mission by going into pubs and playing guitar, and they were basically ushered out. And she said that maybe I'll go into the movies, because she was a beautiful woman, according to the standards of the time. And she made it on screen. And then everyone wanted her to come into the pub and sing the songs that they knew. So they made the mission, but after a while she stopped, because she realized that the spectacle of her, of consuming her, became a consumption of a film star, of a female film star, for her voice, for her appearance, not her message. So they basically failed the media strategy, even though they were very successful. And this is something that this kind of Islamic, Christian, etc., popular culture have to take into account. They may fail because they become too much attached to their consumer culture strategies and caught up in a consumption pattern that do not allow space for a message that they want to deliver.
All right. Okay, I'm now beginning to wonder, since we are rather kind of small group, that is there really a need for a further general discussion at when was it, 6 o'clock? Or should we just sort of wrap it up now for the day?
I think we have to have it at 6 o'clock, because if there are people coming to the concert, they know about
okay.
discussions.
All right, yes. Well, we'll do it then. Okay. Well, that's
But could I then connect back to your what you said in the morning? I asked you about the voice only genre, and now you know my interest more in the voice only genre. Okay. Is there a separate development in Turkey that doesn't really apply to what I said here? That in the mid-90s, Islamic pop was produced without instruments. Early 2001 to 2005 was a transit period, and now it's all instruments.
I never encountered only vocal music.
Oh, but you play the Islamic rock music, for example.
Yeah, Islamic rock. Actually, there is no any title as a Islamic rock music.
Okay.
Some people define the sounds of Umut Zen as a rock ilahi, rock nashid.
Okay.
Because of comprising of the electric guitar break and the ney or Dervish flute. Yeah.
But is there a point when this kind of music sort of emerged?
Probably in 1990s it emerged. But I would like to say that about handsome man, young man. I think all music producers in Turkey follow and try to find the handsome man.
Mm-hmm.
I think I'm not sure how many girl living in all over the world or in Turkey. I don't know the proportion of the female living in Turkey, but I witnessed that the famous producers talked about pop singers on the broadcast media. He said, we need a handsome boy in order to make an image and the appearance of the mass media. I mean, it is very similar in the Islamic pop music. I don't know how to proceed in the international popular music. I mean, he was very famous producer in the recording industry of Turkey. He thought that he needs young and handsome boy for popular music, not rock music, for instance, not rap music. New, handsome, young boy.
Yeah.
It's similar. I like to share this teeny information.
But all right, so let us, let that be the concluding remark that we need more handsome young boys. Because we are just aging old.
Thoughts.
We are
No,
getting older. We have no chance.
there's no future in pop music for us anymore, I guess. I don't know. We'll see. So once again, thank you, Jonas, and thank you all the previous presenters, some of whom have already left. But anyway, so now that we have established this, that at 6 o'clock we should be back here, and then let's see what kind of a general discussion we will have. But now we have more than an hour.